All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. I'm Manuel Pais. I'm going to be talking about accelerating flow with Team Topologies and friends. And again, it's a pleasure to be here participating in this Adaptive Organizations Week. Very briefly, I've been in the software industry for about 21 years, and I've had a number of different roles throughout my career. And I think all that experience helped me kind of distill that kind of knowledge and learning about different perspectives from different teams that are trying to build digital products into what became the book Team Topologies. So I'm originally from Portugal, for people who might be wondering, but I'm based in Madrid. I've been here for about 10 years. So I co-wrote the book Team Topologies with Matthew Skelton. It was published a couple of years ago. Obviously, it's about teams, organizing teams, but it has a specific purpose, which is in the subtitle, Organizing Business and Technology Teams for Fast Flow. So we're going to see why that's important, why it's not just any subtitle, if you like. One of the key praise that the book has gotten, for us at least, is from Charles Betts. He was saying the book provides innovative tools and concepts for structuring the next generation digital operating model. So what does this mean? To me, the book is a set of constraints and patterns that help us think about what is the operating model that makes sense if we want to deliver this type of services and products to our customers and to our market. So it's not about a specific model, a specific way and of organizing which teams should exist and which roles should exist. It's about thinking about what do we need to do and how should we organize for that and evolve as needs change. So the talk itself has 4 parts, and we're going to start with discussing a little bit what is business agility, which a lot of you might have heard, perhaps during the conference as well. Agility, in this sense, applied to business, for us at least, means the ability to respond rapidly to changing conditions, both internally and externally. And when we're talking about rapidly, we're talking about hours or even under an hour. We're not talking about weeks or months. So obviously that's a key difference from 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. We're talking about adaptive organizations being able to respond to changes from customers, from the market, as well as internal changes, as well as technology changes very quickly. So why do we need business agility? Among other things, it helps support remote first or hybrid approaches, which obviously for many organizations today is critical, right? If we have that sort of capability of responding within hours to changes from customers to new requests, then very likely we have in place everything that we need, or most of things that we need to be truly remote first, where teams can contribute and people can contribute from anywhere in the world, because we have a setup that allows us to respond and to get changes into our products, into our life systems very, very quickly. And that's obviously the other aspect that why we need business agility. The speed of change, as I was saying, has changed dramatically. 5 years ago, even maybe doing monthly release of our service, of changes to our service or product, would be kind of good enough, would be aligned with the competition. We know now that not being able to release at the very least weekly, ideally daily or multiple times a day, is going to be a disadvantage. It's going to put our organization at a disadvantage compared to the competition, because those things are possible. And I'm going to give some ideas of what do you need to make that possible. Because we need to respond much faster to technology, adapting and adopting new technology that makes a difference in terms of speed, in terms of reliability, in terms of how well we can provide a service to customers, but also other kind of conditions that change outside the organization. Even climate can affect if we have, I don't know, catastrophic data center problem, maybe because of very high heat, and the data center is basically down. What do we do? Do we have the ability to quickly change to another data center, or get some other resources to serve our customers? And even geopolitical and any kind of external factors that might affect what we need to do as an organization, and to do it very fast. Obviously, the competition, there's increased global, local competition. The barrier to entry on almost any industry is very low in terms of technology, even in terms of regulation. So obviously, for example, if we're thinking about finance and banking, compared to even 5 years ago, today I'm not going to say it's easy, but the barrier is much lower. So we have fintech organizations, startups, even in the insurance domain as well. And so they can get started, they can make sort of a dent in other large organizations, which until now really didn't have to think that much about speed and about how quickly they respond to change, and now they do. So also, when we're talking about business agility and fast flow, those are kind of high level, if you like, ideas, and it's not about kind of following a buzzword. It's about being able to answer some questions, right? So it's not that we want business agility per se. It's because what we want is to have answers to some questions, like how do we optimize as an organization for fast flow of change? How do we support and have teams in place that allow the organization to respond quickly? How do we make sure that we're focusing on the user needs rather than focusing on just on technology or just on what internally we think might be helpful, but actually it's not aligned to what the users want? How do we easily course correct when we need to adjust? Meaning, if we're trying to validate that changes we're making to our products and services meet user needs or help solve problems or fix things for users, how easily do we get feedback on, did we actually achieve that? Or did we just deliver more features and more changes without actually getting the feedback to understand if this made a difference? And if it didn't, what do we need to do next? So this kind of course correction, right? So aiming for business agility, aiming for fast flow means that we will be able to answer these questions more easily. And basically fast flow, because we're talking about accelerating flow, because fast flow is a prerequisite for business agility. Obviously, it's not the only one, but it's a strong prerequisite to be able to respond quickly to changes. So if we take sort of a step back, if you like, to think about being agile and what that means, if we want to be agile and in the business term as well, and we want to achieve fast flow, we need to kind of go beyond the ceremonies, right, of agile as a framework, as a manifesto, the manifesto are the principles, but the frameworks provide us ceremonies, which can be helpful, but they're not directly necessarily helping us achieve fast flow. And so to get started, we need to look at some indicators of, are we going faster? Are we going increasing our agility? So that we can sense also when we're starting to go off track, when we're not improving or we're actually slowing down. And so we have a body of work in the industry available today, in particular, the Accelerate book that many of you are probably familiar with, also published by IT Revolution, like Team Topologies. And this book provides us insights based on research with thousands of organizations across the world on what are some key indicators of high-performing teams and organizations, which also means fast flow. So if you're familiar with the book, you know about the 4 key metrics: lead time to get a change into production for customers to use, deployment frequency, mean time to restore from a problem in production in one of our services or products, and change fail percentage. These metrics provide some indication of if we're improving on them, we're likely getting improving our flow, getting closer to that sort of business agility by consequence. If we're not improving on these metrics, then likely we have some work to do in terms of understanding what is blocking us from achieving faster flow, what is blocking teams for doing, becoming more performant. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, we need technical agility, right? And so again, thinking about Agile, not just as the practices and ceremonies, but also what we now know are key technical practices and approaches to achieve fast flow, to be able to deliver and run modern software systems and services. So we need fast feedback. We need good deployment pipelines. We need visibility on changes that are going to production, understanding when a change fails very quickly, why did it fail, so we can fix it and check again that the change can go through the pipeline. So the pipelines give us visibility and controls over what kind of changes go into our production environment so that we don't run into problems or compliance issues or what have you. So that's critical. It's sort of backbone of technical delivery of changes. We need other good technical practices like test-driven development. We need pair programming, mob programming, rich telemetry, so we can have very good insights on what is happening in production, how are customers using our service, are we having reliability issues or any other kind of issues that we need to address. All these technical practices are known and are available, and there's tooling available, but we need to put in the effort. Cloud native, obviously, it's very important. It makes it much easier to have things like very high observability, and again, that ability to get quick feedback on our running services and on problems that might happen on those services, and understanding how to quickly diagnose and have much more kind of data insights on that. It also supports fast recovery from problems, right? That we have shorter time to recovery. And obviously, cloud native and all the tooling and the landscape supports automation, which also supports faster delivery. Of course, fast flow is not just about automation. In fact, there can be a lot of other issues that are much more significant compared to the lack of automation. And we'll look at that in a few minutes. Essentially, in terms of technical practices, all the continuous things, continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous testing, performance, etc., are important, and they are indicator that we are less depending on specific practices, or should I say specific approvals. We're less depending on specific things to happen because we have a continuous flow, right? We're not thinking about security only when we have a new release. We're continuously thinking about security. It's built into our pipelines, built into our tooling, and the same for testing, performance checks, etc. All of these things are important. But then it's still not enough, unfortunately. And we now have, thanks to the State of DevOps report from 2021, we have even more research, more data on what helps organizations become more highly evolved and become more agile, essentially being agile, not just doing agile. And one of the key results and one of the observations that they found through analyzing data from thousands of organizations this year is that, yes, we need the technical practices, we need cloud, and we need automation, But we also often are held back by organizational structure and dynamics, right? That's why I was saying sometimes automation is not the starting point for really making drastic improvements in flow and agility. It is important. It's not something that we ignore, but organizational structure and challenges can be much more challenging and blocking us from achieving faster flow. So what do we need? Among other things, we need team ownership of software and services. We can't have services that don't have owners, and we can't have teams that own too many things, too many services, or too many pieces of software where they cannot really respond adequately to those changes in those pieces of software, if you like. And so we need to start thinking about our systems and our architecture of our services in a way that is team first. So if you like, we call this team first software architecture. So we're thinking about how do we have ownership of services, but also we limit the size of services to fit in what one team can deal with effectively and have those good metrics from Accelerate or good indicators on those metrics, right? That they have fast or short lead time, they can deliver and deploy frequently, and they can recover from problems quickly. So they need to be the owners of services and have the cognitive capacity to deal with them. And this often leads to the fact that we need to realign, rethink our architectures, right? Whenever I see strong discussions on technical monoliths, the thing that comes to mind is that, well, why is that technical monolith in place? It's probably because there's I would say, a business monolith. There's a tangling of business concepts inside that system. It's not that we intentionally made the technical and the code very coupled. It's because over time we were not thinking about how do we split these larger systems into business streams that make sense, business value streams, if you like, and then decouple the architecture and keep the teams in mind, right? So all these things are related to each other. So we can use techniques like domain-driven design. It's very powerful. It helps us to do that untangling of business concepts. So we can then have faster flow. We can have teams with more ownership and more loosely coupled, right? We don't have 20 teams working on the same monolith. We have 20 teams that most of the time work on independent services. Sometimes they will need to collaborate and they will need to make changes and synchronize changes, but that should be more of the exception than the rule. From a more strategic perspective on the business side, we can use wordly maps. They help increase situational awareness and apply the right techniques to think about, okay, which of our services or products should be custom built, which ones should we productize, which ones should we actually rely on commodities and utilities. And starting from the user needs, why do our users need this service or product, and then why should we build it or productize it versus relying on a third party to meet those user needs. There is an example of wordly maps at the end when I give you a case study around Team Topologies. So we'll come back to that. And for people who are not familiar, maybe that will help you understand a bit better what I'm talking about. But I recommend looking into wordly maps. There's a lot of conversations going on, and even a book coming out next year by Suzanne Kaiser on how do we apply wordly maps and team topologies together, and domain-driven design as well. So this is an emerging trend, if you like. And team topologies specifically talk about how do we achieve rapid feedback, what kind of teams, what type of teams allow us to have faster feedback, faster flow, and when do they need to interact and how, right? And then think about cognitive load, the cognitive capacity of teams so that we are not overloading them. And again, to reiterate, we're talking about fast flow in the sense of rapid flow change. We can deliver value. So it's not deliver just features very quickly, because if those features are not helping customers or not helping the business or not being used, then we're not providing value. It's a rapid flow of change that gets validated with fast feedback. So we need that feedback from the running systems, ideally directly from the customers as well, obviously, but we need a lot of data and telemetry on the systems to make sense of what's happening. In traditional kind of ways of developing software and waterfall, obviously, but even kind of Scrum Fall and this kind of halfway approaches to Agile, what we tend to see is that we have handovers in the life cycle of the services of the software. And so the more handovers we have, the more wait times we have, the more we need to synchronize work across multiple teams, synchronize priorities, and losing information every time there's a handover to another team. So this is why I was saying earlier, automation helps, but you might have, if you have this kind of scenario, you definitely have a lot of wait time in those handovers. So in many cases, organizations spend, to make a change from idea to production, they spend 85% of the time in wait states. So one team waiting for another. So it's critical to look at this and try to reduce handovers. What we would like to have, ideally, is streamlined teams, as we describe in Team Topologies. So a streamlined team is one team that has end-to-end ownership of a service. That means they will be able to take input from customers, what customers need, and feedback from the running system or service, and understand what do we need to do next? What do we need to change? What kind of experiments do we need to run to maybe try to change the user behavior, maybe to increase retention, increase sales, whatever it is that the business cares about. If we have this type of team, what you see here is that the work never leaves the team. There are no handovers to other teams. We have a team that can take the needs and think about the needs and make the changes to the software, test them, release them, and then monitor and follow up on how is this change helping the business. This is what we would like to have. Obviously, there are challenges to achieve this, but we know, and from the work in Accelerate as well, these are the type of teams where you have the faster flow, when the work doesn't leave the team, when you don't need to have high work in progress because you're starting one feature or one change, and then you have to wait for the infrastructure team, and then you start another feature, and then you have to wait for the testing team, and then you start another feature, and nothing gets finished, right? So that's not fast flow. Like I said, there are challenges to have this sort of streamlined teams with end-to-end ownership. So what we actually need is an ecosystem of teams. We need other types of teams that are kind of supporting the streamlined teams. And in startups, you might see that they only have streamlined teams. Maybe we only have 2, 3, 4 streamlined teams, and that's fine. At some point, likely they will start to need platform teams, enabling teams. If we can live with only streamlined teams, it works for us and we have fast flow, great. But typically, they're going to need help. So what does an enabling team do? This will be a team of experts in some domain where we see gaps in the streamlined teams, right? So typically, if we're coming from development or application teams plus operations teams, plus testing teams, that kind of traditional view of the organization, typically, if we want those to get to streamlined teams, we need to get those teams that were used to only code and maybe deploy to actually understand about how do we run a service in production in an effective way? How do we do observability of our service in production? But also other things like how do we focus on the user experience? What do we need to think about? How do we do user research? How do we validate if changes are actually, or some experiment actually meets the goal of the experiment? And so all those areas might benefit from having enabling teams. So you probably won't have enough UX experts in-house to have one in each Streamline team, right? But you can have an enabling team that is small and whose objective is to mentor, is to teach other teams so they learn about user experience. They won't become experts themselves, but they will know enough to do most of the work. And so the enabling team can be on any domain, can be test automation, can be around some kind of regulations in our industry, can be anything. And then platform team is also usually critical. So the platform team provides internal services as a product to the Streamline teams, which tends to start on the technical side. We tend to start with things like providing CI/CD, providing deployment pipelines, providing infrastructure provisioning, but always with a self-service approach, right? If we want to keep the Streamline teams going fast, they cannot depend on other teams to do work for them. They cannot wait for the platform team to do some deployment or provision some infrastructure. They need to be able to do that themselves. But the platform can be self-service and help them. Complicated subsystem, you can ask me at the end. We try to avoid them, but sometimes there's some very niche needs around some technology or some knowledge that we need a dedicated team, but we try to stay away from that. And then we have the interaction modes between teams, right? Like I said, we're aiming for loosely coupled teams that can work mostly independently, but it's not black and white. It's not that we're never going to have dependencies between teams. So when we do need teams to interact, then we should have clarity on what kind of interaction is that. Can be collaboration, two teams working together for a period of time to achieve some solution or sort out some problem that is common to the two teams. We might have X as a service, which is, as you're probably familiar with, any kind of infrastructure as a service provider or any kind of service that is provided by one team or one organization to other teams. So we're talking specifically internally as the services provided by a platform to internal teams, right? When that's provided as a service means we have the right maturity of this service so it can be consumed independently. We don't need to have requests coming across between Streamlined and platform teams. It's sort of self-evident. How do we use this service? How do we consume it? And facilitating is typical for enabling teams that are helping teach and mentor Streamline teams on some domain, as we talked before. Again, it should have a specific purpose. So we're not going to teach in one interaction everything there is to know about user experience. We're going to have to phase that over what does this team need to learn today? If they have no knowledge of user experience, we need to start with baby steps, right? And then later on, we might facilitate them again with more advanced kind of techniques and knowledge, etc. When we have these things, these kind of tools in place to think about the organization and the teams and interactions, then we can start having a sort of landscape view. We have a snapshot of what's happening today. Maybe we have this kind of teams. We have two Streamline teams working on these services for end customers. We have a platform team that provides some services. We can see there's some collaboration going on with a complicated subsystem team. We can see there's an enabling team facilitating a Streamline team. We have an overview at the given moment in time of what's happening, which teams exist, what is their purpose, what do they provide to other teams or to external customers. And that will give us hints of what do we need to do next. What are the gaps we need to address next, or what new services do we need in the platform, or maybe we need a new Streamline team for a new kind of market opportunity that we have some new kind of customers. So again, the State of DevOps report from this year, looking at teams and how this Team Topologies ideas in particular help or don't help organizations, they found that highly evolved firms actually use a combination of Streamline teams and platform teams as the most effective way to manage team cognitive load at scale, meaning to allow teams to be productive, to be performant by giving them ownership of service that makes sense to them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of some of the constraints and anti-patterns, if you like, to some extent, that we see in organizations that block them from achieving fast flow. One of them is having blocking dependencies. So I'll come back to the tracking, but what I mean here is that often if we have a team that is trying to deliver some change, some value, and we have a wait time where we have to wait for another team to do something, to execute some work for us, that's where we are blocked, right? And the fact that we might start working on another change doesn't prevent the fact that we're blocked on the first change, right? And so we want to move away from that to achieve faster flow. And so ideally, what we have are mostly non-blocking dependencies. So in the case of a platform, for example, providing self-service approach, what we have is non-blocking dependencies. Yes, the Streamline team might depend on the monitoring service in the platform, but they don't depend on the platform team per se. They don't depend on that team to do work for them. They depend on that team to provide the capabilities, the self-service capabilities for the Streamline team to do their work faster, right? So we consume the services from the platform, but we don't have this request-based dependency, blocking dependency-based approach. So when we understand these two types of dependencies, and can be others, some dependencies that might be slowing us down, but not necessarily blocking. But what we should be doing is start at least tracking which dependencies are blocking from non-blocking, so that we can then use the interactions and to address the blocking dependencies. So maybe we can collaborate with another team to understand how can we decouple the two teams, right? Today we depend on you because of this, but how can we do that ourselves, right? So we want to remove all kinds of barriers to fast flow, handoffs, approval gates, manual inspections, this type of things, and replace them with self-service APIs. At least if we want to achieve fast flow, if we want to really have business agility. Another shift or challenge that we see often has to do with compliance, right? It's a very common example of blocking dependencies is around compliance. And of course, we need to follow the regulations. We need to abide to the rules in our industry. We need to make changes safe to users and to customers. Obviously, that's not what we're talking about. We're not questioning that. But how we do it can be different, and it should evolve. With all the technical advances we have today compared to 5, 10, 15 years ago, we should not have to have a compliance approach which is based on approvals, based on handoffs, based on specific teams doing the approval work, right? Specific teams or specific people. So we need a shift from permitting and allowing and approving to enabling the fast flow, to enabling Streamline teams. It's quite difficult. It's, again, another emerging approach, and it's going to take time for many organizations to figure this out, and we're going to need more examples. That's one of the areas we're focusing, me and Matthew today. But really, when you want to scale the expertise, when you want to have more teams able to go fast because they know how to do compliance in particular, we need to think about how do we scale, right? What do we need to be compliant to keep the compliance while having multiple decoupled rapid flows of change and therefore teams aligned to those rapid flows of change. And that's based on self-service APIs as well as providing the knowledge in an enabling way. So it might be something like that. Like when I'm reusing that snapshot, maybe that's what we're focusing on here, where we're trying to build in some APIs to perform, some checks, some compliance as code in the platform. Again, the evolution of technology and cloud native in particular is helping us do that today. So we have the tools. Maybe they're not perfect, but we have tools to help us do that. And at the same time, as you can see here more on the top right, we have the domain experts acting as enablers for compliance governance. teaching, mentoring, explaining what are the regulations, what do we need to comply with, how do we do that, and how do we validate, etc. So this combination is what's going to help us remove a lot of the barriers around approval gates, handoffs, etc. in this particular domain of compliance. Another critical aspect to support fast flow is the product mindset, as you've probably realized by how many times I've mentioned product by now. So obviously we're starting with a good product development approach for the products we provide to our end customers that provide, value to the organization, provide the revenue of the organization. So we need to start there, obviously, if we're not doing that yet. So having good approaches to experiment, to do user research, to validate if we're actually changing the behaviors of users as we desired or we're trying to achieve. But then we need to apply this mindset internally to the organization as well. It's not just about the teams that are working on end customer products, it's also internally. So we need to have a product mindset for essentially almost everything we do internally. Even today, there's a lot of talk about having data teams thinking in products, right? If you might be familiar with the idea of data mesh, or maybe you've heard about it, that's effectively thinking about what are the products that we should have internally around our data, right? More than just providing access to data, is what are the products that make sense on top of that data. So we need a product mindset for internally. Stay with a kind of functional or skill-based or even project-focused mindset internally, that's not going to help us achieve business agility. And I'm not saying that we don't have any projects. There are situations where they make sense, especially when we realize there's going to be a need for different teams to interact with each other. But most of the time, we want to focus on products. We want to focus on how does this product help with a certain business value stream. So what is the definition of product then? If you go on Wikipedia, it's a very kind of blunt definition of meeting some user or market needs. But actually, that has also evolved. And I think the work of Marty Kagan, that you might know from his books, Inspired or Empowered, where he references Team Topologies as well, he's talking about the product as a user experience, a holistic experience, right? Is the functionality, obviously, which features we're providing, but also the design and the monetization of the product and the content, if it's content-based. Obviously, I can mention for the millionth time that Apple products have been good examples of the product not being just about the features, functionality, but how that functionality is provided and how the user engage with it. Also, product is optional to use, right? If you go in a sneaker store, you don't expect to be forced to buy some sneakers, right? You might walk out and you didn't buy any, or you choose what you want. No one is forced to buy or use a certain product, or an iPhone versus Android. You make your own choice. So the product is optional to use. Secondly, a product is carefully designed and curated, right? That's how the product is going to provide more value to users and therefore become more engaging and more adequate to the tasks that the user needs to do. And so that is another kind of critical idea of what is a product. Also, product simplifies something for users, right? And I really like this example because people could play a song that they want, and all they had to do is insert a coin, a quarter, or any other currency at the time, and select a song. That's it. It would start playing. They didn't have to know about how do I put the vinyl on the record player, and how do I start playing it. The machine would do it for them. The product would do it for them. And so a product simplifies something for users, right? Simplifies some tasks, some workflow, or simplifies how they can meet some need. A product evolves and takes advantage of technology changes as well, obviously. We're not stuck with products that use technology that is no longer evolving, because then the product cannot evolve with it, right? So these ideas around what makes a good product and what we should be thinking about in terms of product focus means that we have a very strong focus on user needs. And that's going to drive good software, which has a very strong user experience. But this is true not just for the experience for our end customers, but also should be true for the experience internally for our internal teams. And software should get out of the way in the sense of we're designing the software to be usable, to be easy to understand, to execute, and to provide value to the users without being very complicated. And so that should apply again to end customer products as well as internal products or internal services. And therefore comes the other kind of important shift if we want to achieve fast flow, which is particularly the platform shift to think about products and have strong product management in internal platforms versus thinking about the platform as, well, this is some shared services that everyone can use. Well, great, but are those shared services actually helping teams go faster? Are they helping teams do things in an easier way, a simpler way that they have less to worry about? And so if we contrast the platform, the internal platform, with the product aspects we just saw, then a platform should be optional to use as well, right? Why should we force teams to use the platform? That sets the wrong incentives for the platform itself. If we don't have to care about adoption of the platform, if we don't have to care if it's really helping teams or not, because we're forcing them to use it, then likely the value of the platform is going to be much less than it should be. And that means we need to take time as well to do some sort of internal marketing around the platforms. We need to advocate, why is the platform service useful? What have you done in the platform that provides better value for internal teams compared to third parties, or compared to the way that teams were doing things in the past, right? So we need to do a bit of this marketing, but also especially we need to understand product management inside platforms, use good techniques for user experience, understanding user personas, and talking to the teams, basically, not doing things in isolation and expecting them to help the other teams because we didn't talk to them. We came up with, we realized actually after the book was published that platform is really what it should be, is a curated experience for engineers, the customers of the platform. So we're providing an experience that simplifies and helps Streamline Teams in particular, so they can accelerate and go faster because they have less to worry about. They know they have a good CI/CD service in the platform. They know they have a good monitoring service in the platform, and they rely on those in a self-service way to accelerate and do their work much faster than before. And there are many case studies that you can look at that show this value. Companies like Adidas, BMW, and many companies that have taken this approach of actually focusing a lot more on the value and the good product management and good technical approaches as well for the platform, for the internal platform, because that's kind of becomes the engine to accelerate, right? It's the engine that is not visible to the end customer, but it's actually what's helping the sort of the organization as a machine to go faster. I'm going to end the presentation, and I think there will be time for questions with an example of Team Topologies. So there are actually obviously a number of case studies in the book, if you're familiar with the book, and these were applying specific patterns that we talk about in different organizations like Adidas, IBM, and others. Of course, since the book was published about just over 2 years now, we've seen quite, I would say, massive adoption almost. Very strong adoption. We're starting to see kind of mainstream adoption, large banks that contact us, and telecom as well, large telecom and insurance. So it has been really kind of helping a lot of organizations improve on their business agility. And we've been publishing some examples, the ones obviously that we have approval to publish on our website. So I want to talk about one in particular, which is Food Asylum. But if you're interested, if you go to teamtopologies.com, you'll find more examples. And we've worked with a number of organizations across, like I said, different industries, different sizes, and even different parts of the world. But let's look at Food Asylum, because it's interesting how they apply different ideas from Team Topologies and other ideas that I mentioned earlier in the talk. It's not a very large organization, but has been around for a while, for about over 15 years. They have 2,500 employees, so it's not small. It's not massive, obviously. And about 2 years ago, basically, when the book was coming out, they had come to sort of a halt in their ability to respond quickly, and they could feel it. They had this sort of organization that you still see very often, where you kind of have separation between product and engineering. And then when you look at engineering, there's also some kind of lack of clarity. Some teams are just development and can work on anything. Other teams seem to be aligned to some sort of service. You have R&D team. This is where they were at the time, and was increasingly difficult to get any change deployed. Frankly, they had this sort of massive synchronization they had to do across many teams, with the product managers trying to understand what is the status of all these different bits that are happening in different teams. So they decided to adopt Team Topologies because they thought, it sounds like a much better approach. And they actually were able to come up with Streamline Teams that you see here in yellow, that were much more aligned with the kind of services they provide to end customers, as well as a platform, which at the time they were still calling the services team. One of the key things that they said helped them was the product managers could now essentially fact check their different roadmaps. So different product managers had different roadmaps, things that they thought they should implement and validate for their users. They could now understand, because teams were aligned to specific services and products, what do we need to do? When do we need to interact with other teams, with other product teams? And so this helped them actually cross-check that their ideas and their roadmap for where the products are going made sense and were feasible. They also moved from the services team to a truly platform team focused on self-service. They combined Team Topologies with wordly mapping, which is quite interesting. So this is how a wordly mapping kind of look like. So we always start with the user or customer needs, and then we start to understand the services and products we provide. How do they meet those user needs, right? And then we look at the landscape of, is this something that already is provided, already exists as a commodity, or is something that is really new when we think we can provide this as a core service that helps us gain advantage in the market and with customers. So it's something that is custom and maybe we can productize, etc. So we're placing kind of our services and products in this landscape of where are we now? And we know that over time, things tend to become a commodity, right? It can be a long time frame, can be within 10 years or within 20 years, we expect this to be a commodity, but we're thinking ahead about this strategic approach. And then they started to overlap the topologies, right? If we're building a custom service at the moment, what kind of teams do we need? Probably we need more streamlined teams. If we're building something that's productized or more of becomes a commodity, probably we tend to have more kind of platform services that don't change very often. So I recommend looking at wordly mapping. Like I said, there's work coming out. Susan Kaiser is writing a book right now on this overlap and domain-driven design as well. They also adopted this idea of a thin platform. So when we talk about internal platform, it doesn't mean rebuild what, GitLab or GitHub or Datadog or whatever third party can provide to us. Now, what we're building is a thin layer on top that provides internal value to our teams because it has the internal context built in, right? And so they had a really good example where they needed a service to locate stores, right? So the sneaker stores. And initially they were thinking, let's build a service with a database and runtime, API, and all these kind of things. And then they realized, actually, do we need that? Because this actually information doesn't change very often. You don't have a lot of shops from one day to another coming up or moving location, right? So they said, let's start with the smallest thing that can work, which is a version configuration file that you can see here, a JSON file. And let's see if that's enough to help our Streamline teams while keeping, the platform as small as possible. Because the more we have in the platform, the harder it's going to be to maintain and to evolve, right? And this worked quite well. They never had to actually build more than this for the location service, the store location service. But obviously, the important is the mindset of we're understanding. So going back, we're understanding what do our teams need to go faster without also overloading the platform with things that maybe would be nice, but are not really critical or helping the teams. And so this provides a lot of clarity for them on how to evolve. So they applied these concepts from Team Topologies combined with wordly mapping. And some of the results was the product managers felt they had this superpower now. Finally, they could see how the roadmaps made sense or didn't make sense. When do we need to interact with other teams? Thanks to the stream alignment. It helped with communications and getting teams to be more responsive and more autonomous. Again, we're not saying 100% autonomous, but much more self-sufficient. So it was really helpful for them. And so again, on the website, teamtopologies.com, you can find a written article from Paul and Andy, which we're really thankful for. And so just to sum up what we have seen, we've seen that business agility really means responding rapidly to changing internal and external conditions. For business agility, is not just following agile ceremonies, is having situational awareness, clarity of business purpose, good technical practices, and localized decisions, meaning we're empowering the teams to make good localized decisions because we did other work of decoupling teams and business concepts as much as we can. So this is for us what being agile and having business agility means, right? Compared to just following some framework. We need a strong focus on user needs, user experience, have clarity on the products that we offer, what is the mission of the teams that are building those products. And again, both for end customer products as well as internal products we're providing to our teams. And we looked at one of the real world examples we've been publishing on the website since the book came out. So really, to sum up, how does Team Topologies help with business and technical agility, and therefore helping with fast flow, which is the point of Team Topologies? We encourage decoupling of business concepts, so the monolith that ends up happening due to tangling of business concepts, so that we can have more responsive organizations because we have loosely coupled teams and value streams. The patterns in Team Topologies help to move from blocking dependencies, especially things like compliance checks, into self-service, flow-aligned, API-driven checks, in particular in internal platforms. Team Topologies helps to make sense, is a sense-making approach to some extent for situational awareness. We saw those snapshots of which teams do we have, what are they doing, how are they interacting, and why. And therefore, that helps have faster answers to where do we need to go next. What are the gaps we need to address next, or what are the new opportunities that we need to follow, and maybe we need new teams, or we need to change the responsibilities of teams, perhaps, but we can make sense of it, right? And finally, it helps us to focus more tightly, more concretely on the core mission. What is the core mission of the organization and of the teams, and what are the core products and services we offer internally and externally, versus kind of just building anything that we could possibly build without a clear idea of, is this core or is this a commodity that we actually should be relying on other third parties to provide to us. And we want to limit team cognitive load. We want to have teams with ownership, but also sufficient capacity to deal with the sort of service that they're responsible for. We have new things coming up. There's a workbook that's specifically focused on applying Team Topologies ideas for remote teams and remote interaction. So that should come out in January as a digital resource first. If you go to our website, there's a lot of free resources for learning about Team Topologies, applying some simple templates and techniques to do some of these things, like tracking dependencies between teams and things like that. We have infographics that provide kind of a high-level view if you want to share with other people in your organization, what is Team Topologies, what does it help with? And we have an academy started this year, where we have on-demand video training. We have 2 courses, Team Topologies Distilled and Platform as a Product, where we go into more depth around what is this idea of treating the platform and internal platform as a product. There will be more courses coming up. This year with the Team Topologies for managers is coming up this year, and then next year there will be more courses. Thank you for listening. I know it was long. I hope there's still time for questions, but we covered a lot of ground, and hopefully it has been useful.
Oh, that was great, Manuel. That's okay that you went a little over. It was such good information. I really love the visualization with the Wardley maps. I'm going to use that, I think, starting today with a few teams I'm working with. So that's great. We do have a few questions. If you can stay a few minutes.
I'm happy to stay. No problem.
Awesome. Thank you. So the first one is, how important are metrics around team happiness and motivation within your model, like NPS or employee engagement?
Yeah, those are super important. I mean, for us, when we wrote the book, it's not explicit in the book, but for me personally, what I hope the book also helps, besides increasing business agility, is increasing team morale, increasing people morale. So we think, and we've seen examples, multiple examples by now, where having this clarity on what type of team are we, what is our mission, who are our customers, that really helps increase the sense of we have a shared purpose. We have more autonomy to make localized decisions because we have less coupling with other teams. Exactly. And so the end goal of that partially is to increase the autonomy, increase happiness, employee engagement, all these things, which I don't know who made the question, but you rightfully
I did.
You had the question, which is a great question, because that's actually what a good indicator of how healthy is the organization overall.
Yeah,
and absolutely. We know the numbers are staggering, right? I don't remember the specific numbers, but you look at the average employee engagement was surely under 50% and quite low. So then you have employees who are not engaged, and all this is acting against business agility, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. The next question, how does change management fit into your model? Do you recommend a particular change management framework?
I don't recommend a particular change management framework. I recommend looking at whatever change management process you have and looking at those possible blockers to faster flow. Looking at where are the approval gates, where are the handoffs between teams, and then start thinking about how can we remove those. So it's not that you're removing the governance or removing the controls that you need to make safe changes, but the way you get there can change. And so I would recommend looking at your current change management process, regardless of what framework it's based on, and look at where are those points where we have handoffs, we have approvals or manual inspections, and why can't we move to a more self-sufficient approach where teams can do that by themselves and not depend on others.
That's great. Centers of excellence, COEs, are what kind of team?
They're not a type of team in Team Topologies. Centers of excellence, again, comes down to how they really behave. So if you have very clear kind of mission for the center of excellence, and the mission is related to enabling other teams and not kind of become a sort of ivory tower telling other teams what they should be doing, but not helping them on the ground, then that's probably not that helpful. I would say, in general, thinking in from the lens of Team Topology, center of excellence, I would expect to have a very strong enabling approach, right?
Yeah.
And that you would be looking at what are the gaps that we have in our organization, in our teams, what do we need to help them with. But the enabling we talk about in the book is on the ground. It's not creating just some guidelines and creating some, look, everyone should follow this approach. It's actually together with the team, understanding where are they now, because teams have different background, different experience. And even though team A can be really good at deployment pipelines, team B might be really behind. And so you need to meet the teams where they are today. After you do that, then you can help them. But if you're just staying away and say, everyone does this, it's not very helpful. And just on another note, something that we've seen, a pattern that can be quite powerful, is with communities of practice, where you have informal networks of people coming together because they have shared interests and they want to share what they're doing or problems they have. That's super powerful. It builds informal networks as well that are useful for the organization. And also you can detect, well, actually, there are some common problems here that many teams are struggling with performance or struggling with some particular thing. And then we might take that as input to maybe we need enabling teams around deployment, or maybe we need some platform service to make this easier for teams. So it can be a very good combination of communities of practice, people sharing their challenges and their solutions, and then identify how does this fit with platform services or enabling teams.
Yeah, well, great response to that. I think we have time for one more. In the book, you mentioned the Conway's Law to explain the impact of team configurations. Has the pandemic added new challenges?
Good question. So let me explain very briefly Conway's Law. Basically, what's telling us is that we need to be aware that our systems are sociotechnical systems. It's not just, in other words, we can't just think about software systems as purely technical things, entities.
Yeah.
We need people who are designing systems to also look at the teams and understand there's a kind of bidirectional relationship between how teams are organized and communicate with the systems that we produce, the technical systems. So whoever has that kind of responsibility of looking at the high-level architecture of systems needs to be also involved with the high-level organization of teams. And this can vary a lot. It can be that you come to the technical architects join the senior management or HR in terms of looking at this together, or you have kind of social technical architects, which is something that's also emerging, of having people with that kind of lens of we're not just looking at the technical side, but also how the teams fit here. In terms of the question, has the pandemic added new challenges? I think at the communication level, yes. And that's partially why we're creating this workbook that's focused on remote interactions. What I have seen is that in some cases, it even helped internally for a team internally to communicate better or more effectively with, tools like Slack and video, etc. So in some cases, teams actually clarified internally how they communicate, but between different teams, it's a bit of a problem, because in the office you would see other people, you would have conversations over the coffee machine or the
water
kitchen,
cooler.
or having a cigarette for people who smoke outside. And you would get this awareness of, oh, that team is working on this, and how is that related to us? And actually, we had a similar problem. All these kind of things don't happen as easily. Mm-hmm. So you maybe need to be more intentional around what kind of interactions should we have between different teams working remotely. And so the workbook talks about also how do we organize our online spaces, which are more predominant now, to promote the right kind of collaboration and communication between teams. So it's easier to discover with which other teams should we be collaborating and with and where, right? Because that's used to be in the office, but now we're not in the office. So where are they, right? They're online, but which specific spaces online should we be using?
Yeah, wonderful. I think that's the end of the questions. Oh, wow, what a great presentation, and thank you for answering all those questions. I really look forward to that workbook coming out early next year. Is that what you said?
The IT revolution is targeting end of January, so hopefully it's going to be easier because it's digital, so it's not a print. Maybe there will be a print edition later in 2022, but in January the digital version should come out.
Great.
We're crossing fingers at least.
I'm hoping for that for you and for me. Hey, thank you so much again, Manuel. We really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.